recognition of a genocide is very important for the community also, for the trauma to be accepted. So that's why I think the political decisions are a very important step. Still, there is no safety in Sinjar. People are afraid of going back. There are still Turkish airstrikes against Yazidis in Sinjar. There is no rebuilding of Sinjar program because of political issues between Kurdistan region and also Baghdad. And nothing really changed, even if there is now a decision of closing the IDP camps. When the Yazidis go back to Sinjar, where shall they go?
Genocide is a new word combining the Greek word genos meaning race or group, with the root of the Latin sidere meaning to kill.
Became interested in genocide because it happened so many times.
Power is all against one. Violence is the opposite. The extreme is one against all.
This is Not to Forgive, But to Understand, a podcast series discussing genocide studies with experts and those connected to its critical questions. I am Luis Gonzalez Aponte, co-host with Saba Karim.
And what we're about is really to try to understand why evil happens, why there are perpetrations in genocidal scenarios and scenarios of mass atrocity. Not to forgive, but to understand.
Forgive, but to understand.
Not to forgive, but to understand.
Leyla Ferman is the co-founder of the Yazidi Justice Committee and director of Women for Justice. In this interview, we discuss the ongoing fight for justice a decade after the Yazidi genocide. Alongside the discussion, we will showcase selected artworks from Falah Kaboo, featured in Sarwa Azeez's article, Beyond Mourning, Art as Healing a Decade After the Yazidi Genocide. Special thanks to Sarwa, Falah, and Genocide Studies and Prevention for allowing us to share their work.
The Yazidis live in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey. Why have they been the target of ISIS?
Well, in general, it's very difficult to say why ISIS attacked the Yazidis, but there are at least two reasons. On the one hand, it's because of the ideology of ISIS. So already before the 3rd of August 2014, so before the beginning of the genocide against the Yazidis, ISIS was already sharing in their online newspapers or online magazines that they would target the Yazidis. They would explain why and how they would misuse Yazidis as slaves. So it was clear that ISIS was talking about the Yazidis, saying that they were not believing in God, and yes, that they have the right to kill them also and to enslave them. And on the other hand, as you might know, already in the summer of 2014, ISIS was controlling parts of Syria and Iraq, and they needed to connect their capitals, both in Raqqa in Syria and Mosul in Iraq, also together. And there was the highway of Sinjar, and they tried to create or to find a direct way to connect their both capitals. So at least we can say that these are two reasons why ISIS attacked the Yazidis in Sinjar.
Going back to what you just mentioned, I have read Nadia Murad's, the last girl, Nadia Murad, who's a Nobel Peace Prize winner, and she's also a Yazidi survivor. She spoke about how, taking sabaya, which is the Arabic word for slaves, these women were made sex slaves to ISIS perpetrators. Taking sabaya was not decided on the battlefield, it was planned. And as you just mentioned, it seems there was already a detailed plan about who would get these sabaya for free and who would have to pay for it. And I think it's also mentioned that all of this was detailed in this glossy propaganda magazine called Dabiq, because there have been many perpetrations against the Yazidis for a very long time. And apparently the one in August 2014 was the 74th. Could you tell us more about that?
Well, in the collective memory of the Yazidis, they experienced and they suffered from 72 genocides during the Ottoman Empire. So the discrimination against the Yazidis, the campaigns against the Yazidis was something you can find already in the history of the Yazidis and also in the history of the Yazidis during the Ottoman Empire. So they have been so-called Ferman, so orders during the Ottoman Empire, by which Yazidis were suffering. They were carrying out genocide against the Yazidis. So there was also another attack before the last genocide. Yazidis call them the 73rd genocide, and that's why they call the genocide committed by ISIS on the 3rd of August 2014 as the 74th. So when Yazidis are talking about the genocide of today, they are remembering at the same time also the genocide which happened in the past and in the history. So it seems like the pains of the community, the collective pains, are repeating now again. And when they, for instance, sing their mourning songs, by trying to overcome also the trauma, they are also mentioning it, and they are also connecting also the genocides, like when they mention the names of perpetrators or of calling ISIS the perpetrators, then they're referring also to other genocides in the past by saying ISIS, like also this and this person did also in the past of the Yazidis.
I want to understand why ISIS deems the Yazidis to be kuffar, the Arabic term for unbelievers, which has justified their extermination of the people. So this includes not just what we talked about as in, the rape and sexual slavery of women, but also the forceful conversion of the young men in that community. I have also read about Tawûsî Melek, who's the chief angel of God and basically the main representative of that community, of that religion. And Tawûsî Melek is the peacock angel. Why is it that ISIS has completely misconstrued who Tawûsî Melek is and the origin of the Yazidi religion?
Well, I think to find an answer to these questions, or to this special question, is we have to look into the history. And I think in general, we have to understand that minorities or non-Muslims had no equal rights during the Ottoman Empire. And with the fall of the Ottoman Empire and with the creation of the new states, the situation of the Yazidis didn't change. So as I told you before, there were many genocides, and genocide didn't just happen. I mean, you can maybe compare it with the anti-Semitism and the Holocaust. I mean, the Holocaust could happen because there was a widespread anti-Semitism. That means also in regard to the Yazidis, and even until today, and I was also witnessing it myself when I did research also on the field, even in Kurdistan region, that there is still a discrimination of the Yazidis. They are still excluded. They are still also not recognized. And instead of asking how comes or why are there victims of discrimination and also violence, I think we have to ask in another way. I think when you think about the minorities in general in Middle East, and you have the neighbors of the Muslims or the radical Muslims also, it is, I think, an idea of perpetrators to find reasons why to kill also their neighbors or why to discriminate their neighbors. So even if you refer to Tawûsî Melek, I mean the peacock angel, I mean this symbol of the Yazidis is used or misused by radical Muslims or radical Islamists in order to say that there was something wrong with Tawûsî Melek, with the peacock angel. So that's why I think the reason we will not find the reason by these communities which are suffering from genocide themselves, but how perpetrators are misinterpreting or causing misinterpretation of things and the values of the suffering group. So that's why it's really difficult to understand. I mean, we also don't understand how comes that anti-Semitism for such a long time is still widespread. So can we really find a reason? Can we really say this is the reason why anti-Semitism is still I mean, is still a part in the communities where we are living?
So what is Saddam Hussein's involvement in all this? Nadia Murad said that Saddam tried to get loyalty from Yazidis against the Kurds, his sworn enemies, so that they would side by him against the Kurds and fight his wars. But he also wanted the Yazidis then to join his Ba'ath party and call themselves Arabs, not Yazidis.
It's very difficult to analyze the relationship of the Ba'ath regime and the Yazidis, or even if we could call it a relationship, or how the Ba'ath regime was in Iraq was looking at the Yazidis. But what I can say is that there is something special in Sinjar and the Yazidis. They have never been a very strong part of the Kurdish movements. So, for instance, the Yazidis in Kurdistan area have normally been also a part of the Kurdish movements. They would also describe themselves as Kurds. And this is different in Sinjar. The Yazidis there, they describe themselves as Yazidis and not as Kurds. Maybe this was a way somehow inviting the state or also the Ba'ath regime to try to use the Yazidis in Sinjar or misuse them also in their conflicts with the Kurds. But what also happened during the Arabization policy of the Ba'ath regime, that Arabs were settled in Yazidi villages, also in Sinjar, so not only in Kurdistan, but also in Sinjar. And so Yazidis had to leave also their homelands. And this policy, of course, had an impact on the Yazidis, on their lives also, because they were settled in new settlement areas around Sinjar mountain in the desert. And this changed, of course, a lot. This was also the reason of many, many difficulties also for them. And on the other hand, Saddam Hussein and also the Ba'ath regime tried to show the Yazidis that they are not Islamists. So they are parts of the Yazidi community, even until today, saying that under Saddam Hussein, it was at least safe. They were saying during that time, it was for them, not really a big issue to go to other cities, to bigger cities, like to Mosul and other places. And but when they talk about this time about Saddam Hussein, they are talking about safety. And of course, for a community, a minority, especially in the Middle East, a minority in Iraq, safety is a big issue. So I think on the one hand, Saddam Hussein tried to show them how important it is to support the Ba'ath regime, because they are the reason why the Yazidis could live in safety. And on the other hand, they were misused. They were discriminated on the other hand. So it's very difficult to say Saddam Hussein had a positive impact on the Yazidis, of course.
Identity issues are always very complicated, as we know, and very often they become the reason for, say, political instrumentalizing. When I mentioned to colleagues that I was having this interview about the genocide of the Yazidis, the immediate question was again about identity. So what my question right now is, what is the connection between the Kurds and the Yazidi? I think we have to talk about it because very often, for instance, in even the book I read by Nadia Murad, the one that I just mentioned, there was a reference to how the Kurds were basically the enemies of what was going on then in August 2014. But I'm sure that there is more complexity to it.
Yes, it is if it comes to identity issues and also the question who belongs to a nation. I mean, there are many theories about this question, of course, and what I can say in general is they are objective and subjective issues when it comes to a nation. So you could of course ask which language do they speak, tell me more about the history, where are they living, and so on. So it could happen that when you focus on the objective criteria, that you could say Yazidis are Kurds. And if you ask me and myself, and the observation I did in the last years, especially with doing lots of research also, I would also say Yazidis are Kurdish, and they are speaking Kurdish. The Holy Land of the Yazidis is also in Kurdistan. Cultural issues are Kurdish, but in the case of the Yazidis of Sinjar, it seems that they don't want to be Kurds. And the issue is we don't have the right to call them Kurds if they themselves don't see themselves as Kurds, or if they don't describe themselves as Kurds. So if the Yazidis from Sinjar see themselves as only as Yazidis, we have to accept this. This is the name or the cultural group they belong to. But there are many Yazidis, like in the Turkish part, or also in Kurdistan region, also in Rojava, northern Syria, who describes themselves as Kurds. So it's on the one hand, I think, a political issue also, and if the Yazidis were parts of the Kurdish movements, because normally then they would also say that they are Kurds, but especially the Yazidis in Sinjar call themselves only as Yazidis. And I think this has to do with the fact that they have never been a really big or active part of the Kurdish movements. And I think it has to do with the experience that they made with their neighbors. And if the Yazidis, as I repeat myself, but if they don't feel that they are Kurdish, then they are not Kurdish. But again, if you ask me, I think that the Yazidis are Kurdish in general, and I think we have to do much more research also on the issue of identity, the Yazidis and the Kurds, to understand how comes that Sinjar is very special also in the Kurdish areas, and to understand this.
As I mentioned, ISIS has resorted to verses from the Quran, arguably interpreted to their own advantage, to feel entitled to keep female sex slaves. I also want to speak about how they misused even whatever they extracted from the Quran to justify their deeds. Nadia Murad says in her book that according to these interpretations by ISIS, women should not be separated from their young children, and there are rules for what happens if a Sabiya becomes pregnant. When she's pregnant, she cannot be sold, or if her owner dies, she is distributed as part of his estate. An owner can have sex with a prepubescent slave, it says, if she's fit for intercourse, and if she's not, then it is enough to enjoy her without intercourse. And what is very typical of many accounts of the perpetrations against women is that none of the, well, very few ISIS perpetrators actually respected even these interpretations that they had extracted from the Quran, which obviously have been marked as bad interpretations by many other communities of Muslims. So having said that, I'm also aware that Iraq has not signed the Rome Statute, as you mentioned in your article recently, and therefore Iraq is not amenable to the jurisdiction of the ICC. Therefore, ISIS perpetrators have escaped any trial or legal accountability for their crimes. To charge ISIS with rape is only possible under civil law, the civil law of Iraq. Please tell us more about that.
Well, when it comes to the legal approaches and legal questions, when you ask the Yazidi community, most of them would say that they are in favor of an international tribunal. Because this is also what the Yazidi Justice Committee found out a couple of years ago in a report which has been published, that in regard to the duties coming from the UN Genocide Conventions, at least 3 states violated their duties, and among them was also Iraq. So, of course, we could also now ask the question, how comes that there's no state until today which opened a file or brought Iraq also before a court because they violated their duties coming from the UN Genocide Convention. So for the Yazidi community, that's why they are not focusing on Iraq when it comes to legal issues, because they are aware of what is happening in Iraq. Even these times, there is a discussion, and it seems that the parliament will pass a law, an amnesty law for ISIS members who are arrested in prisons in Iraq. So they don't expect so much. And this is, of course, a problem. The Iraqi government already announced that they will bring the UN institutions also to an end. So I think, in regard to the legal issues, the Yazidis don't expect very much from Iraq. And of course, the question should be, how can communities in Iraq, of course, contribute to an improvement also in these ways? But I think the question is not only related to the Yazidis. I think the Yazidis as a minority are not powerful and strong enough to make a change, unfortunately. So that's why I think here, very urgently, all communities in Iraq have to become active, and also the international communities to find ways, after also the end to the UN institution and also missions in Iraq, to find a way how to convince Iraq how important it is also to find the legal answers to the genocide and also to ISIS atrocities in general.
So you bring up 2 points here, which I'd like to, ask further about. First is, I want to talk about, again, the treatment of these women by ISIS and the repercussions. And then later I want to talk about all the legal suits against these ISIS perpetrators. So first of all, ISIS have, whenever they captured and kidnapped these women, and turned them into sex slaves, they threatened them, these women from the Yazidi community. And they said that they would be shamed by their community if they went back, especially after losing their virginity, after being raped, after being forcefully converted to Islam. ISIS perpetrators told them that they will never be accepted again, so that it's better for them to stay with them, the ISIS community, and accept their fate as sex slaves. The Yazidi community, however, intelligently reacted to that and declared that women with such a past would not be judged or stigmatized, especially because of their forceful conversion to Islam, and especially, of course, for not being virgins anymore. Isn't this something admirable about and progressive about the community?
Well, on the one hand, when you look at the Yazidi community in general, and also the Yazidi leaders, especially also the prince family of the Yazidis, you will not find examples that the community is accepting or demanding violence against anyone. This should not mean that there are equal rights between men and women. It's still a conservative community, of course, but it didn't really surprise me on the one hand that something like this didn't happen, that Yazidis would kill their girls or their women who could escape from ISIS captivity. And on the one hand, when I think about the different campaigns, hate speech campaigns against the Yazidis in the last years, I think even if they would have decided to kill their women, I think this would have been also an issue of conflicts in the region. So that's why I think anyway it is very close to the values among the Yazidis, and I think in general they're also an open-minded also community. That's why it was not really surprising for me on the one hand, and on the other hand, I think there was no other way. Even if they would have decided it's impossible, I can even not imagine, that it would have happened. Yes, I think also the women, I did lots of interviews with women who escaped from ISIS captivities. Those who escaped in the first month, I would say, they were still thinking that this might happen and that their families wouldn't accept them. But after, I would say, 1 or 2 years, when it was clear that already women went back to their families and nothing happened, the other women were also aware of the fact that when they return to their families, the families will be more than glad to have them back. So yes, this became clear also for the women after a while.
So I think the other question about matters of jurisdiction and the legal suits against ISIS perpetrators is relevant here, because if we study the evolution of international law, especially over the last 20 years, we do notice that from the status it once had of being the toothless tiger, where international law could only roar but have no actual bite, we see that there is a change right now. So recently, the Gambia went against Myanmar in the interest of the Rohingyas. And we also had recently South Africa pledging for the Palestinians at the ICJ. What has, and your article mentions this, what have some European courts done in favor of the Yazidi community against some of the ISIS perpetrators in the exercise of what we now know as universal jurisdiction?
Well, I think there have been altogether around 10 court cases against ISIS members. Most of them were women, especially in Germany. So Germany is a good example, or should be a good example also. I think there is now one case in Sweden and also one case in the Netherlands. And it was the first time, so we can call it also a historical decision of the High Regional Court in Frankfurt 2021. The case against Taha al-G described the violence against the Yazidis as a genocide. And this opened also many other ways. For instance, the decision of the Bundestag also to say that the genocide, the violence against Yazidis was a genocide. It was only and also possible because of this court decision, and also the political decision in the UK to announce and also to say that this was a genocide was also linked to the legal decision of that court. But again, when you ask the Yazidi community and how comes that the Yazidi community is not really observing these cases, it has to do with the fact that the Yazidis are saying these are women and they are more powerful ISIS members, and they were also much more responsible ISIS members. They should bring them before also a court. So again and again, the community is demanding an international tribunal because they say the atrocities of ISIS, especially against the Yazidi community, cannot be solved with individual cases against ISIS members, especially against women here in Europe.
On the issue of genocide itself, the Yazidi perpetrations have been declared as genocide by the UN. My question is, and very often many of us wrongly believe that once mass atrocities are declared to be genocide, it's the end of the story, the job is done. In what way is that not a job that's been done, even after the declaration of genocide?
I think recognition of a genocide is very important for the community also, for the trauma to be accepted also. So that's why I think the political decisions are a very important step. On the other hand, when you look on the issue of what happened afterwards, you could say that there is not really a next step. So it's only like a political statement and that's it. The case of Germany is a bit different because of the court cases against ISIS members. But you wouldn't find such a big support of the Yazidi community, for instance, in Sinjar. So still there is no safety in Sinjar. People are afraid of going back. There are still airstrikes, Turkish airstrikes against Yazidis in Sinjar. There is no program, rebuilding of Sinjar program because of still political issues between Kurdistan region and also Baghdad. So there's still such a big suffer, and nothing really changed. Even if there is now a decision of closing the IDP camps, even if when the Yazidis go back to Sinjar, where shall they go? Most of the homes are destroyed. There's so many problems still they are facing. That's why we cannot say that. With the political decisions, everything is done. And still more than 2,700 Yazidis are still held in captivity by ISIS, and still the families are looking for their family members. So this is also an aspect of the ongoing genocide. So there are so many open questions to the future of the community that we can. Unfortunately, we have to say that there have been political recognition, yes, by many states and institutions, but it didn't really change the situation of the Yazidis, and especially not the situation of the Yazidis in Sinjar.
In your article, I quote, "Making space to commemorate various group persecutions creates an opportunity to embrace diversity, open up to others, and acknowledge what people bring with them. Between 2021 and 2023, for example, the Lower Saxony Memorial Foundation, in cooperation with the Women for Justice, implemented Project Ferman, a documentation and educational project on the Yazidi genocide that drew first links with the Holocaust. Another example is a survivor-centered visual narratives project in which 5 research clusters on the Holocaust, Rwanda, Iraq, Syria, Yugoslav wars, and the Turtle Islands serve as the basis for joint educational and research work. The project also features the story of a Yazidi woman from Sinjar, told in the form of a graphic novel, close quotes. I just want to remind the audience that the last project you just talked about, that is mentioned in this excerpt, which is about the graphic novel, is being done, if I'm not mistaken, with Shell Anderson, who's also going to be, who's also a guest on our platform. But back to the excerpt, my question is, in the listing of the reasons for these projects of memorialization that you mentioned in your article, you stay away from the usual adage, never again, which we parrot out whenever we speak about programs of memorialization of war, mass atrocity, and genocide. Instead, as I said, you refer in the article to making space to commemorate various group persecutions creates an opportunity to embrace. So you speak about embracing diversity, opening up to others, and acknowledging what people bring with them. You don't speak about making this an example and teaching people that, it will help stop the perpetrations from happening again. Was this intentional? Is this a form of a skepticism about the adage, never again, which many of us are anyway skeptical about?
Yes, unfortunately, what the Holocaust survivors always were demanding, never again. Unfortunately, we have to say that it is happening again, and it happened again, and is still continuing. So I think these kind of projects are important to understand more about the genocides. I mean, how comes that genocides are not just happening? I mean, what can you tell us more about the perpetratorship? How comes that people are becoming perpetrators? And these kind of questions are still alive. That's why caring about the Yazidi genocide has also to do with understand the issue of genocide. What happened before the genocides, for instance? Is there kind of system? Can we compare, and are we allowed also to compare genocides? And anti-Semitism, to understand this also, would it help also us to focus on other genocides, to understand more the issue of the anti-Semitism, for instance, and also to focus on the Holocaust? I think there are still so many issues we haven't focused on yet when it comes to research on, like also the Middle East. For instance, for us, I mean, living in Germany, I'm really wondering how comes that we didn't focus on the German direct and indirect involvement in the Ottoman Empire, and how they supported or contributed direct or indirectly to the genocide also against the Yazidis. Why are we not focusing on it? Because also these aspects will also help us to understand more and will understand more the Holocaust and also the Second World War, and maybe, and I think so, they will also help us to understand the problems we have today also with anti-Semitism, and also other issues like discrimination also, and so on. So I think to refer to or to have a deeper view on the history is one aspect, I think. And also we live in a diverse community, and I think we have to decide whether we want to accept it, and if we recognize it, and if we see the diversity as a value, or if we have a conservative view on politics, and I think anyway it will not really change a lot, because, for instance, the Yazidis, they have collective way of memory. So anyway, it is they are living with these memories, and they have there's some tradition also, how to continue to remember also what happened in the past. So I think there are so many communities also with so many memories, collective memories, that I think we have to make a decision. I mean, do we accept this diversity also, or are we ignoring it? And I think especially in these times where right-wing parties are becoming much more powerful also, I think it's so important to have a closer look in the diversity, the values also among the diverse communities. And we will learn, I think, a lot. And I think we will, this is what I understand also from the example working on the Yazidi genocide, I think it would help us to formulate new questions also, or to find also links between things we are working on. For instance, to understand, is there a historical link between the Holocaust and, for instance, the genocide against the Yazidis during the Ottoman Empire, with the link also to the recent genocide. So that's why I think it's a win-win situation. I think for all communities, they have the right also to be recognized in a diverse community. And on the other hand, I think it will, for the whole community, it will also help us to understand questions we already and anyway have. So that's why I think to respect and to recognize and even give the floor also to the diverse communities also in Germany, I think will be a win-win situation, and will also be a very strong answer and answer against right-wing movements and right-wing parties also.
I mean, it's interesting that you talk about this realization in the community of researchers on genocide, who've discerned that it is important to understand or to figure out if there are any patterns or if there are any connections between different genocides across time and space. Another, I think, understood premise, or another premise that is recognized among the scholarly community, is also that often it's been noticed that if a community is targeted, it continues to be targeted over time. And just reading about the continuous persecution of the Palestinians, or of the Jews, the continuous persecution of the Armenians, and now we're talking about the Yazidis. Many people have come up with solutions, and many of these solutions have been about stopping that process by reparations. Is that what you believe as well?
Well, especially among the Yazidis, there is something I would say I really realized in the last years, because of the oral tradition among the Yazidis. The Yazidis had never their own state. They didn't have a status. So most of the books or written information available in different archives are written by non-Yazidis, and of course also perpetrators. So, and also when it comes to the issue of Israel and Palestine, I was wondering, what does a piece of paper mean? I mean, for instance, the Yazidis, also to ask them, who's the owner of a piece of land? Because also for the Yazidis, because of so many genocides, because of violence, because of pressure, even if there's a piece of paper saying that a special person is the owner of a piece of land, it doesn't mean that, the person is really the owner of the land, because of violence, because of pressure, because they have been forced, to sign it, or they have even not get any money or something like this for this. So that's why I think only to focus on paper and to say that a piece of paper is an evidence is, I think, not the right way to find a solution to ethnic conflicts, to find a solution of conflicts of states, and also between states and also ethnic groups. I think the way of finding a solution is really to find a dialogue and to find moderate also people. So I think whenever it becomes an issue of extremist groups, I think this is the worst situation. So I think pressure and violence cannot at the end kill everything. That's why I think communities, even if they don't have an own state or status, they will, if they survive, if they're strong enough to survive, if they find ways how to survive, they will keep on telling their stories. And I remember it's not only an issue for the Yazidis and also for the Kurds, for instance, also suffering in Turkey. I remember I was once in Armenia with a friend, and she told me that her grandparents are from Western Armenia. And I was always thinking Western Armenia, you have now, Armenia, the state of Armenia, and it's in the western part. And then I realized when she was showing me a map that her grandparents were coming from what we call Kurdistan. Or when you ask the Yazidis, because the Yazidis, there was a genocide also, when the genocide against the Armenians took place, also Yazidis were also escaping and have also been killed. So Yazidis would call them the land of the Yazidis. So that's why I think I didn't, of course, had a problem. I was even glad to hear this, but because, yes, it is Western Armenia, because it is the homeland of the Armenians. And why shouldn't they call it Western Armenia? Why shouldn't Kurds call it, Kurdistan? Why shouldn't Yazidis call it Yazidhan? So maybe it's easy to say this because I'm not a state authority. States authorities would say, of course not, it's not possible. But why? Why can't we find ways in order to accept this? Because in fact, it is the traditional homeland of so many groups. Why is it such a problem that giving a name to a piece of land? Why is it so important? Why is it so important to say this is a piece of a piece of paper saying that this person or this group is the owner of this not piece of land? Why should this be the answer to the questions? Because there have been so many violence in this area, also in the Middle East. I think it's not the right way just to say, okay, we are looking only on documents and only on written issues. I think it's so important to get in touch with the communities and to find more and to understand the problem also better. And if you understand the problem better, you will also find, of course, a solution, midterm or long-term solution. And I think only focusing on states, I think the idea of states in the Middle East for the Yazidis in this case was only a big suffer, and the problem of the problem also until today. So that's why I think you will not find a proper answer to the question of the Yazidis, for instance, with only focusing on state and state authorities.
So back to the article that you wrote, you mentioned that the Iraqi government in March 2021 passed the Yazidi Female Survivors Law. Could you tell us more about that and also comment on its effectiveness?
Well, the law was originally was intended to support Yazidi women who were enslaved by ISIS and who have been raped by ISIS. And afterwards, it would also include other women from other communities. So although it is called the Yazidi Survivor Law, it is also there to support female survivors from other communities which suffered from ISIS atrocities and ISIS captivity. And as much as I'm aware, there's a support of the Yazidi women in different manners, and I think parts of them are already implemented and other parts are on their way to be implemented. I think in general, the survivor law is a very special and very big issue also, and it has been well accepted, of course, among the Yazidi communities, and it was a very special law also, because you wouldn't find such an example in other states. Also in regard to the support of those who suffered from genocide. So I think this is very, very special. And on the other hand, there are so many open questions still. So I think the survivor law will not, unfortunately, of course, will not contribute to, to overcome the trauma and to overcome the genocide. So I think much more steps are needed, also among the Iraq, to support the Yazidis to find a way back, or to go back to Sinjar area, also to create also a new life also in their traditional homeland, because for Sinjar, the majority, it is the last area, the last traditional homeland area of the Yazidis, with the majority being Yazidis. So it means if Yazidis won't go back to Sinjar, it could also mean the end of or disappearance of the community in the Middle East. Because you wouldn't find such a big a big area also like Sinjar in the Middle East anymore, with the majority being Yazidis. And still the majority wouldn't like to go back, not because they are not linked to their traditional homeland, but because of safety reasons.
Recently, the US troops were pulled out of that region, making the Yazidis more vulnerable to, ISIS and to the rest of the perpetrators and those who have, been their enemies for the longest of time. Could you tell us more about that?
The Yazidis in general are at risk, not only in Iraq, but also in Syria, northern Syria, in the Rojava area. And I think the issue of whether the US troops will stay in that region or not will definitely have an impact on the situation of the Yazidis, because still, the Iraq is not a functioning democracy. Still, the Yazidis are not recognized. There's no status of the Yazidis. And especially looking to Syria and the situation in Syria now, the borders are anyway open. Still, we don't know if the Islamists will really stay as the only ruling power in Damascus also. And the Yazidis in Sinjar are very much concerned also about the situation in Syria. That's why I think the policy of the US is very critical, also for the safety of the Yazidis, for the future of them. Who are they supporting also in the future? I think there are still many questions we cannot give an answer yet. But in general, yes, the Yazidis are at risk, and there are still safety problems in their homeland and in the areas where they are staying.
The importance of recognizing complexity in every group that exists out there, whether they are Yazidis, whether they are Kurds, whether they are even, ISIS. I don't know about ISIS, but I haven't read enough about them to be able to make this difference. But we also have to speak about the people within those towns and areas where these women from the Yazidi community were abducted and turned into slaves. Now, in the case of Nadia Murad, and I'm sure in the case of other Yazidi women, there were Sunni Muslim women within the community, or Sunni Muslim men, who took pity on these women and the treatment that they were exposed to, and even helped them out. In the case of Nadia Murad, what we learn is that the Sunni Muslim family that helped her out ended up getting into trouble. And of course, it's terrible to read about that. Nadia Murad says in her book about these people who helped her, I stayed at Mina and Bashir's house for several days while the escape plan was worked out. And most of the time, I kept to myself thinking about my family and what was going to happen to me. If no one asked me any questions, I was happy to stay quiet. They were a very religious family, praying 5 times a day, but they said they hated ISIS, and they never asked me about my forced conversion or tried to get me to pray with them. So here is an example of a Sunni Muslim family who was sympathetic towards this Yazidi woman. But then there is another extract where Nadia Murad goes on to speak about these families and says, and these are all bystanders, and we need to talk about bystanders now. She says, I tried to have compassion for these families. I'm sure many of them were terrified, and eventually even those who welcomed ISIS at the beginning would come to hate them and say, after Mosul was liberated, that they had no choice but to let the terrorists do what they wanted. But I think they had a choice. Had they gathered together, pooled their weapons, and stormed the Islamic State Center where militants were selling girls or giving them as gifts, it's possible we all would have died. But it would at least have sent a message to ISIS, Yazidis, and the rest of the world that not all Sunnis who stayed in their homes supported terrorism. Maybe if some people in Mosul had gone into the streets and shouted, "I am Muslim and what you're demanding of us is not true Islam," the Iraqi forces and the Americans would have gone in earlier with help from the people living there. Or smugglers working to free Yazidi girls would have expanded their networks and gotten us out by the handfuls instead of one at a time like a dripping faucet. But instead, they let us scream in the slave market and did nothing. And I think this is important to me as a genocide studies scholar, because we're talking about the importance of bystanders reacting to the injustice that is going on around them. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's very difficult. To be honest, it's for me also difficult to have an opinion on this situation, because I think I haven't did much research also on it. But what the Yazidis who were enslaved by ISIS and to whom I was speaking is that definitely, I mean, it's not that black and white, of course. So, for instance, I remember that a Yazidi woman was saying that she was escaping from the house where she was staying, and she was just knocking on a door of a family that she wouldn't know, and they would help her, for instance. Or where a woman was saying that she went to a hospital and she told, I mean, a woman who was working there that she's enslaved, and she was crying and saying, "I'm also almost like you. I cannot escape from here." I think this is very clear that, of course, you will never have black and white, and you have also something in between. But for me, it's very difficult to understand also the support by now. I mean, because I haven't did much research on it to understand how much the local people also supported ISIS. And I think it's very difficult also to make a research on it, right? And especially in these times, who would say that they supported ISIS and how they supported them. For the Yazidis in Sinjar, at least, many survivors were saying in Sinjar city, where during the policy of Arabization, the Ba'ath regime settled Arabs in Sinjar city, they were, for instance, saying that when ISIS came to Sinjar, the families were supporting them, were telling them that Yazidis are living in these houses, for instance. They were even marking also the houses of the Yazidis. So that's why I think for survivors, yes, of course, sometimes it's difficult to distinguish between, I mean, ISIS perpetrators and to Muslims who were also suffering from ISIS, because can you, for instance, say that, of course, there were so many others also who have been killed by ISIS, so many other groups who have been targeted. So how would you say that, for instance, Arabic mother, for instance, who lost her children, she's also suffering like also Yazidi mothers, for instance? It's difficult, of course, to say that, I mean, there was only ISIS and only Yazidis, because ISIS targeted, I mean, all who were not supporting ISIS, in fact. So also Arabs were targeted, Kurdish Muslims were also targeted, and all other groups. So yeah, I think the survivors are telling also this kind of stories.
I certainly want to hear about the survivor side of things. You work with survivors near and far. You're based in Germany. Tell us more about some of the experiences that marked you.
When I started to get involved in this genocide, Yazidi genocide, I supported women who escaped from ISIS captivity. So me and my colleagues, we did hundreds of interviews with those who were held in captivity by ISIS, and those who were staying for almost 1 week in Sinjar mountain surrounded by ISIS until they were rescued by Kurdish forces from Rojava, from Syria. So in regard to the women who escaped from ISIS captivity, of course, there's a difference between the interviews we did, for instance, at the beginning of the genocide, for instance, in Kurdistan region or in Turkey, and then later, for instance, in Germany or in Canada or somewhere else, because the circumstances have an impact on the women, if they are ready to talk to us, how they are opening also, I mean, how open they are also to talk to us. The circumstances they are living, for instance, I remember we did once an interview in an IDP camp where the whole family only had one tent, and we were sitting in their family tent, and it was raining, and we asked everyone to stay somewhere else. So, and this will also have an impact on the women, yeah, I mean, on what they would like to share, how long they would like to share something with us. So, but what I realize is that the community, or those who escaped now also into Germany, they're very glad to be here. And it seems that many of their own community now in IDP camps, they would also like to come to Europe, because they don't feel safe. And in fact, in the last 10 years, nothing really changed. So there's still no political status. There is still no safety. That's why for so many families, it's very difficult to return to Sinjar area. And on the other hand, already around 100,000 people moved back. But this does not mean that they are very glad and they are happy to go back, but there was no other way.
You also, when we first chatted, discussed the example of one of the survivors who didn't want to talk about it anymore and wanted to move on with her life. Could you tell us more about that? Because I think, again, some of us have this misconception that every survivor wants to speak. But the truth is, many of us just want to bury it in the past and move on. Mm-hmm. Because talking about it is a form of re-traumatization as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is what especially the women are telling us when we get in touch with them. Many of them don't want to speak anymore about the genocide because they are now in Germany. They are living in safety. They started to learn the German language. They are going to school. They started to work somewhere. So it seems that somehow they are living a new life. And I think for us, and also as a researcher and those who didn't suffer from a genocide, sometimes it's difficult to understand why and how. One could also ask them, even, for instance, today it's much more difficult for me also. I feel this also myself. It's much more difficult to ask them, would you be open to speak to me, or would you be open to do an interview also? And we have to respect this. But I think what is needed is that, for instance, there was one woman, she said she didn't want to speak with us, especially in the framework of the Project Ferman, where I was working. And 2 years later, because we were still there, she came back and asked if it is still possible to do an interview. So, and this is also, I think, what the Holocaust survivors, I mean, or the experience also with them showed us, that many of them would just speak 20 years after the Holocaust, for instance. So what I think is very important to have a permanent place or an institution where whenever they would like to share what they experienced, that they could also go there. And so far, we don't have such an institution or a place where Yazidis could go when they feel ready also to share what they experienced.
What changes you think that allows someone to refuse, for instance, to talk about an experience and then decide one day that they will?
And what I experienced, I mean, when I was working in the Project Ferman, which is what was a project of the Lower Saxony Memorials Foundation, I think there were two aspects which fit very well together. One was to have or to create some kind of trust. So, for instance, our team, and also because parts of our team were also Yazidis, I think this was very important to create trust. And on the other hand, the project was a project of a German institution. And I think that the Yazidi communities in general, they trust German institutions. That's why I think they were very open when we asked them, because on the one hand, you had people you would trust, they would speak your language, they would know your community, and you could always go back to them. Even if the institution wouldn't be there, they would know who you are, and they would know your family, and if they would like to complain, they would know where they could also go. And on the other hand, to have a serious place, place with experience and working with survivors, a place, for instance, we also worked with the Yazidi survivors. We were doing workshops also at the Bergen-Belsen Memorial, and we understood that, survivors, they connect with each other very fast. When we, for instance, try to connect them, this is something else. But if they come together, or if they come together in a special place like a memorial, they connect very, very, very fast. And I think for us researchers, we are trying always to find, we are working in archives, we are doing interviews, we will try to create new sources. But I think there is something we can maybe sometimes not understand, that bringing people together is such a big power also, because when people feel connected, there are so many things are possible, I think. That's why I think to have a place where survivors could meet and exchange, it doesn't mean that we would compare, any genocide with another genocide, or that we would say this was a bigger genocide and this was a smaller genocide or something like this. And I think the survivors, what I experienced, are anyway not speaking, like that. And I think, yes, I think it's sometimes we forget how powerful the connections between people are, and especially among individuals who suffered from genocide. I remember when I was in the project preparing an interview with a Holocaust survivor, I just asked my colleagues to give me an overview of the CV of the Holocaust survivor. And when I read it, there were so many similarities to what happened, for instance, to Yazidi survivors, how they lost their family members. And really, that's why I think, because we are not survivors, sometimes it's maybe difficult for us to understand. But when I saw how strongly connected they suddenly were, I felt that, we are not aware sometimes about this deep relations also among survivors also themselves.
And I think that also speaks just in literary terms about the universality of the human experience of pain, of suffering, of violence, and of mass atrocities in that sense, and genocide.
Yeah, it's connecting people. It's, again, because we're researchers, we are writing and we are doing research. And I remember when I was doing an interview with a Holocaust survivor in Israel, there was a photo or a painting. She was painting when she saw a photo of the Yazidis who escaped from Sinjar Mountain to Rojava, to Syria. There was one famous photo also with a mother and her, I think, 3 children. And she was painting this photo. And we saw this photo also in her living room. And when I asked her how comes, why did she do that? Why did she paint this photo? She was saying when she saw this photo, this was remembering her to Anne Frank, for instance, the daughter of the mother. So that's why I think, of course, we wouldn't learn of something like this if we wouldn't visit the survivors also, if we wouldn't talk to them. That's why I think to bring survivors together, to get in touch with survivors directly, and also, for instance, to bring survivors to a memorial. We will observe so many things we wouldn't, of course, observe if we wouldn't be active also. That's why I can only motivate everyone, to try to create, floors or also projects to bring together also survivors.
So Leyla, I noticed, this is just out of curiosity, I noticed that there was a connection between your last name, Ferman, as well as the word that the Yazidi community uses for genocide, which is pretty close in pronunciation, it's Ferman, and also the use of the same word by the Ottoman Empire when they coined this word to mean an edict.
Concerning the oral tradition among the Yazidis, normally the Yazidis would name children, or many times they would name children after the events which took place while the children were born. And Ferman means genocide in the Yazidi context. So the Yazidi community is using the word Ferman for saying or for talking about genocides, because the orders during the Ottoman empires were called Ferman. And with these Fermans, genocide took place and they suffered a lot. So my grandfather, and my family name comes from the name of my grandfather. His name was Ferman, and he was named after a family member who was born during a genocide. So, and that's why my family name is Ferman, and it means, in fact, genocide. So it might be strange maybe for some people to understand that my family name means genocide. But I think due to the fact that there were so many genocides in the past of the Yazidis, so many children have been named Ferman, for instance, because they were experiencing a Ferman. So that's why it's also a common name among the Yazidi community. It's not a strange name, it's even a common name. And yeah, that's in fact how the Yazidis were keeping their history alive. The collective memory has also to do something with names, of course. There are also other names where, for instance, if they would give birth to a child when they were not staying in their traditional homeland, then they would call them also, for instance, Gharib. Gharibi means something like, I mean, if you are far away from your homeland. So bringing the names also together of the children or of the Yazidis could also help us to understand and to see marks also of the history of the Yazidis. So family history, I mean, the families normally, they keep through oral tradition their own history. And I think if you bring all, family histories together, through oral traditions, then you could somehow understand how the history was looking like among the Yazidis. And I think this is a way how they would keep their own identity also, how they would keep their own history. And this can make us also understand that although there are so much powerful actors like states would keep their archives. They would have schools where they would teach children also how they would see their history. But the Yazidis, although they were a minority and although there were so many strong perpetrators, through this kind of oral traditions, they were keeping their history alive, they were keeping their traditions also alive. So the name, yes, has on the one hand something to do with the project, but it's not because of me, and because of my name.
This was Not to Forgive, but to Understand, with our guest, Leyla Ferman. To our listeners, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more discussions.